Holy City Center Radio is episode 141, and I am your host, Christian Sanger. Today is Monday, July 3rd, 2023. Happy early 4th of July. Obviously, no episode on the actual holiday, so I wanted to make sure I said it to all of you. Enjoy your Independence Day, whether you are off from work or are going to go out and enjoy fireworks or some other plans or just hanging out at home. Hope you enjoy it and celebrating this great country of ours, despite its many faults, some of which were on display on Friday and over the weekend. But obviously, all very thankful to live here. And so enjoy your 4th of July, whatever you end up doing. Not much going on here. I'll get to what I was alluding to a moment ago, although I'm sure many of you already know. Been enjoying time with my parents this weekend. I also made it out to the International African American Museum for the first time. I'll detail that in just a bit. And celebrated my dad's birthday. As I mentioned in the last podcast, we went out to eat the restaurant Locklear's, which is out on, I don't know if it's James Island or Folly Beach. You know, it's one of those, like, it's after the Welcome to Folly Beach sign, but I'm not positive it's actually Folly Beach. I need to look into that. I never know when it officially starts. If it's not until you actually cross over that little bridge, or if it is by that sign. But in any event, it's that restaurant that kind of, if you're going out to Folly, it's on the right, sits on the water, seafood. It's been, I think, a couple other restaurants before Locklear's moved in there. But it was nice. We had to wait a little while to get a seat on the outside kind of screened in patio they have. My parents had their dog with us, so we had to wait a little bit because there's not a ton of seats out there. But despite the wait, it was good. We, all ordered some form of seafood dish and enjoyed the main entree. We all enjoyed. We had some sides like fries or hush puppies and things, and not the best. I don't know if, it was our first time there, so who knows if it was an off night for that stuff. But like I said, the entree portions were good. We were all very happy with that. Just a little bummed on the sides. But overall, a good experience, and glad we were able to celebrate my dad's birthday. So other than that, just laying low, watching some TV. We watched A Man Called Otto, a movie starring Tom Hanks that came out last year. Very good movie. Recommend it for anyone looking for something new to watch. I also finally started Secret Invasion, a new Marvel series that you can see on Disney+. As usual, if you're a Marvel fan, you're probably going to like it. It follows Nick Fury, who is the character played by Samuel L. Jackson. He finally gets his own kind of, he doesn't have his own movie, but this is his first series, where he's the focal point. And it's been good so far. They're 2 episodes in. The third comes out this week. I think they're going to have 6 episodes. So been enjoying that so far. Other than that, not too much going on in my world. So let's move on next to some of those stories I mentioned. We talked about one of the Supreme Court decisions in the last podcast where they decided that affirmative action was no longer going to be legal. It was a case involving Harvard and the University of North Carolina, but will have wide-reaching effects. It's going to, it's now federally going to be illegal to consider race when it comes to admissions. Lots of people online were celebrating this decision. A lot of people also were not celebrating, I should say. But for the people that were celebrating, it's some of them kind of tell on themselves, where they don't really have any information to back up that affirmative action was racism against white people, as they claimed, but didn't seem to really care that, obviously prior to affirmative action, there was clearly an issue with racism against all groups of minorities. And by the way, I mean, obviously, affirmative action has been around for decades, and obviously times have changed, but that minorities included women. Women were not admitted at an appropriate rate before affirmative action was put in place. And that's women of any color. So white women were included in that. Now, as I said, times have changed. Hopefully colleges and universities were in a different time, and we won't see a drop in admissions of any minority group. But unfortunately, there are, I forget if it was 8 or 9 states that already had banned affirmative action, in varying times over the last few decades. And each one, of course, saw a drop in enrollment of minority students across the board. Sometimes they would have it would go back up a little bit, but it never was back to the rate that they had previously and had fallen below what you would expect. So don't be surprised when this happens nationally now. Obviously, that first year, it's going to happen unless some schools do a better job of admitting students of all backgrounds. Uh, yeah, like I said, a lot of people were celebrating this as if this was some gigantic win. I don't see how you can see it as such when we clearly still have a problem in this country. And, we'll see proof of that here over the next couple years as we see what happens to, the freshman classes going into colleges and universities. So we have that decision. Then after I recorded the podcast on Friday, some more decisions came out. Supreme Court decided that President Joe Biden's attempts to eliminate some student loan debt for people was not going to be allowed either. So that this was already on a pause, as you know, because it was a legal challenge. So nope, no student debt relief for anyone. Although the administration says they do have some plans to try to help out some folks, but it's not going to be anywhere near the scope of what they planned. Again, people online cheering this, which is weird to me. Like, I know a lot of it is just people are cheering because they're, conservative Republican or just don't like Joe Biden. So they see it as a quote unquote win. And so, but I'm like, you're celebrating that schools no longer have to make sure that they are, not discriminating against minorities. You're also now cheering legislation that would have helped out countless people with debt, whether it was from a predatory loan or not, it doesn't matter. It would have helped people. Yeah, sure. I'm sure it's frustrating for people who took out a loan and worked hard and paid off their debt, and then seeing other people, not have to. I never understood that feeling of, well, I did it, so why can't you? I never really got that attitude that some people have. So again, weird to see people celebrating that as well. And then the last case had to do with this woman in Colorado who did not want to make a wedding website. She's a website designer, I guess, specifically in the wedding industry, and didn't want to make a website for a gay couple, saying it was against her religion. Went all the way to the Supreme Court. Supreme Court ruled that she is allowed to discriminate against the gay couple because it fell under the First Amendment, freedom of speech. Now, it's not that simple. It has to do so now, a lot of people are like, oh, now every business can just discriminate against anybody, but that's not actually the case. If it falls under this freedom of speech application, then yeah, they are free to discriminate against anyone as long as they can prove that assisting them would be against their religion. It has to do with the fact that because she was designing a website, she was basically creating something from scratch that was going to involve, her, creating. It was her having to make something new. And because of that, it was labeled as her First Amendment right to not do it. So in other words, if you were to go into, a supermarket tomorrow, they can't, and you want to, buy your groceries, they can't deny you service because of whatever your background is, because that wouldn't fall under the freedom of speech. So it's not as horrific as it sounds on the surface as far as all businesses, but it is still horrible, obviously, that as long as you can fit under that narrow definition, you are legally allowed to discriminate against someone. Now, again, people cheering these things. And I do obviously think freedom of speech is incredibly important in this country. And yeah, it sucks that means people like, say, Nazis are allowed to say and post racist things online or hold rallies and things like that. And yeah, it sucks. And I wish they couldn't. But if you restrict people like that, you obviously then run the risk of other groups who are not horrible and evil being restricted by the government. So it's always that kind of like double-edged sword almost, where it's like you want it and it sucks that people are using it for bad things, but then what if something you believed in is bad? So I get being like, hey, it's a win for freedom of speech. But again, to celebrate it, two things can be true. You can say, look, this sucks. I'm glad we have freedom of speech in this country. It sucks that this falls under the freedom of speech according to the Supreme Court. And I really wish that this person couldn't discriminate. it sucks, but I also understand the importance of freedom of speech. So it can be both, despite what people will tell you. But yeah, again, people kind of telling on themselves online when they're celebrating this decision, it's not because they really are excited for freedom of speech, because they would then say, hey, look, this sucks. I hate that she could discriminate against someone, but it is freedom of speech. It really is just people excited that, again, there's a loss for liberals and Democrats, for Joe Biden, and for the fact that the LGBTQ community has become a boogeyman, thanks to conservative politicians and conservative media pushing a lot of false narratives and other, and we all know, we've talked about it a million times, and it's clear that they're just excited because it's a loss for that community. And, you know, putting aside the fact that I think some of these decisions don't really fit the definition of what the Supreme Court said. So I think it's still wrong what the conclusions they came to. Even if they're right, this isn't something to like celebrate. Like I said, you can be like, all right, well, it does fit, and it sucks that this person gets to use it for this, but it is freedom of speech, but I disagree with it. But regardless, it was gross seeing some people's comments online about these cases. A lot of just really bad takes, just absurd, abhorrent opinions on these decisions, and it's going to have far-reaching consequences for a while. And it'll be interesting the first time one of those people are part of a group that can be discriminated against due to these rulings, and see how that all of a sudden changes in their mind. But enough about that. Let's move on to some good news. I went to the International African American Museum on Saturday. Really enjoyed it. The museum is beautiful. It opened early last week, so a ton of people haven't been able to get there yet. You can purchase tickets online at iaamuseum.org. It was incredible. Again, the building and the property itself, beautiful. Inside, through various mediums, the museum's telling the story of the African American experience across different generations. It's showing both the trauma and the triumph, through things like artifacts, different exhibitions, art, old and new art. There's videos that you can watch. There's also, sections that celebrate and help you learn more about the diverse cultures of West and West Central Africa. It also shows it helps you trace the movement of people of African descent throughout the Atlantic world. You can discover, people, events, and stories that maybe you didn't know about that help shape United States history. Just telling it through the African diaspora and their story throughout history. It's pretty interesting. There's a lot of stuff that you've heard of, that about, depending on your level of how much of this history you've looked into and know about. But it shows internationally, nationally, and then also on the local level as far as the state of South Carolina. And there's plenty that you haven't seen before, you haven't heard before, people's stories you don't know anything about, these incredible folks from our history, whether that's South Carolina or the United States and beyond. And just really, really fascinating stuff. And it's just really well done. You can also understand how enslaved people, despite everything that they went through, how through this day, they helped build the city of Charleston, and really, I mean, a big portion of the United States, of the states that were available, or not available, that were around during the times of slavery, and how much that culture is still here, and how much stuff that we have in this country that came from their culture. Um, and it's interesting what has survived to this day. There's also, of course, a specific section dedicated to the Gullah Geechee people. Obviously, something that if you live in South Carolina, especially in this area, you're familiar with, at least peripherally. But it goes into more detail about that culture and their history. It's really, really interesting. And as I said, the building itself is beautiful. It's actually about 13 feet above the ground. So it looks pretty neat when you walk up to it. Underneath and on the sides, they have like a garden area that you can see. And behind, of course, is the harbor. It's built on what is called Gadsden's Wharf. which is the port of arrival of nearly about half of all enslaved Africans that were brought to North America. That's millions of people that were brought into that wharf, coming from these horrific conditions on whatever ships they were on. Many died even right there on the wharf, as they had to wait to get off the boat. If they had diseases, they might have been put somewhere in quarantine, and their horrible journey in America began right there. And so it's a sacred space. It's a sacred ground, and that they want you to treat it as such. In that garden area, number one, that there's an area that shows you where the wharf began, and you can see how we've since built out more space on the harbor. But in that area, they also have something they call the Tide Tribute, which is going to become kind of the iconic element of this museum. I think it's a presentation of what's called the Brooks slave ship diagram, which is a pretty famous depiction of the transatlantic slave trade's absolutely inhuman transport conditions that these poor folks went through on ships. The Tide Tribute shows, like, on the ground, you can see outlines of the human figure. Each represents a man, woman, or child who was, shackled in the bottom of a ship. And then those ships, of course, were just anchored steps away in the Charleston Harbor. As the tide changes here in present day, the shallow pool of water where these outlines are fills and empties, and it covers and reveals these shapes of the human body of the people that we're honoring and remembering. It's bordered on the historic line, as I said, of Gadsden's Wharf. And the tribute is meant to emphasize, according to the museum, the fluidity of the past, present, and future. It's a really moving and unique element to the museum. But for sure. And the other thing I should mention with the garden, you don't need museum. You don't have to pay admission to see that portion of it. Admission is only if you're going to go inside the museum. So you can go ahead and take in the garden and learn a little bit about what the museum has in store. So highly recommend you all check it out. And I really, really enjoyed my time there this weekend, and can't wait to go back. All right. Well, I'm kind of running out of time here, so I'm only going to be able to get to a couple of stories outside of what I just talked about. I didn't intend to talk about the Supreme Court decisions as long as I did, but they are pretty important stories. And also, I should have known I was going to talk about the museum as much as I did, since it was so enlightening and interesting. But I'll quickly go through a couple of stories, some updates that happened over the weekend. So, without any further ado, let's get to it. All right, Jen Drummond, who is a woman that was found with severe injuries along a James Island road. You may remember me talking about this on a recent podcast. Some good news: she has opened her eyes. This is what family members told News 2, and they also said that she's having some movement in her arms and legs. Obviously, still a lot of work that's going to be, in rehabilitation that she's facing, but this is good news because she had been unconscious since that accident that happened a couple weeks ago now. Now, as far as updates on what happened to her, Charleston County deputies and her family members have been going door to door in the James Island neighborhood, trying to see if anybody heard anything, saw anything. They're also asking for anyone to come forward if they have any information at all that might help solve this case. One of the updates is that the sheriff's office has released images of some vehicles that were seen traveling on the road shortly before Drummond was found. Unfortunately, they're using images from like a Ring doorbell or somebody's home security camera, and the images are not very good, but they do show three vehicles. One looks like it might be a pickup around, that was in the area around 5:09 a.m. One appears to be a sedan in the area at 5:13 a.m. The other is maybe an SUV, and it looks like that was around 5:19 a.m. So if any of those vehicles, someone in that area who might have a vehicle like that, who might have been driving at that time in the morning, they are looking to speak with those folks, see if they saw anything, heard anything, or if they were perhaps they hit Jen Drummond on the road. So for now, Drummond's family members say, of course, she has that long recovery ahead, but they have increased the reward from $1,000 up to $3,000 if you have any information that leads to an arrest in this case. Now, if you recognize the vehicles, and again, go to the show notes Click on the link to the story so you can see the images of the vehicles yourself. But if you have any information, you're asked to call Master Deputy Colt Arrington at 843-202-1700 or email him at CB as in boy Arrington, and that's ARRINGTON at charlestoncounty.org. You can also call Crime Stoppers of the Low Country at 843-554-1111. Last story before we move on involves our former president, twice impeached former president, and facing multiple indictments, Donald Trump. He had a rally in Pickens, South Carolina. This past weekend. It was on Saturday, and it'd be about what you expected. Nothing really newsworthy happened. The same old stuff. It was really well attended. Thousands of people. But the one thing that really has been making headlines, at least here in South Carolina, is that the crowd booed South Carolina Senator Lindsey Graham and essentially drowned out his remarks as he was attempting to take part in this rally for Donald Trump in downtown Pickens. Graham actually grew up in the town of Central South Carolina, which is in Pickens County. He grew up not very far from that area, and he did not get what you would expect from a homecoming type of welcome. He said, or from, for the people that could actually hear him, that he was going to help Trump win the 2024 election, and even pointed out that he was part of the Senate Judiciary Committee that helped bolster the Supreme Court's current conservative, what they would say is leaning or majority, I would say bias. But despite that, the large crowd did not seem to care and continued booing him for just over 6 minutes of his remarks, just 6 minutes of booing and jeering. As for Trump, in his speech, he sort of defended Graham, saying, "We're going to love him. He's half and half. When we need those liberal votes, we need him. We know the good ones. We know the bad ones, too." Later in the speech, he again mentioned Graham by name, and the crowd began to boo again. So Lindsey Graham probably expecting a homecoming, probably figured, oh, Trump's people love me. It's the liberals who don't like me. This is going to be fantastic. And it didn't quite go according to plan, did it, Linz? Hard to be sympathetic for Lindsey Graham. Lots more to talk about, but I've run out of time, so we'll have some more stories for you on Wednesday with the next episode. I already can't wait to bring that to you. You don't want to miss it, so subscribe to this podcast if you haven't already so you don't miss Wednesday's episode or any others going forward. If you could as well, please rate, review, like, whatever you can do on your streaming platform. Please do that. It helps out the podcast. You can also go to holycitycenter.com/shop to pick up some merchandise, or go to patreon.com/holycitycenter, where you can also sign up for a tier that will help support the website, the podcast, and everything else. Thank you to Cole Collins, who produced this episode of Holy City Center Radio, and Tyler Boone, whose music you hear in each and every episode as well. Speaking of Tyler, we've got some news. He's coming back to the Charleston area for an event, so you'll hear about that in a future podcast episode. That is what we call a teaser. So be sure to stay tuned, as I mentioned, for that and all other news. Thank you all for listening. I really appreciate it. Enjoy your 4th of July. Stay safe out there. If you need 4th of July plans, check the show notes for a link. I have a list of fireworks and things that will be going on Tuesday. Stay safe out there, though, especially if you're going to be around or using fireworks. We don't need anybody getting injured or worse out there. So be safe. Have fun. Stay cool as well. It's been very hot. So keep safe in that way as well. And I'll talk to you on Wednesday. Until then, good night and good luck.